as you will have read in the newspapers, and as our columnists and political sort of betters, those inside the Beltway have been said, tax is an issue for this year's election. We have a incumbent Labor government which has ruled out personal income tax hikes while Chris Hipkins is Prime Minister, which may not be a long-term gig for him. We have a Green Party that is advocating for a wealth tax, and we have a significant number of people inside the Labor Party who wanted one but have been told by Chris Hipkins they cannot have one. Included amongst that group, David Parker, who was a Cabinet Minister, and of course the Minister of Finance, Grant Robertson. Wealth taxes, depends where you come from, they promise equity. They promise fairness and some sort of, moral high ground for an economy. Or are they just the politics of envy? Let's drag everyone down to an average or below average level. Well, because this debate is abroad in the body politic, I thought it'd be good to maybe have a look at whether or not what a wealth tax is and how it might work, what impact it would have on our lives and our economy. Joining us now from the Taxpayers Union is researcher Jim Rose, who's been looking into this issue. And Jim, welcome to the platform. Lovely to have you with us.
Oh, thanks for having me on. It's good to have the opportunity.
Yeah. Jim, firstly, do we have an idea, and I know this is politics, so it's all a bit grey and movable feast, do we have an idea of what sort of wealth tax those on the centre-left or left of the political spectrum in New Zealand are envisaging? What is the general idea? What's the best picture we've got? If David Parker and Grant Robertson and the Greens had their way, what would a wealth tax look like? What would the policy be?
Well, there were two sets of proposals. The first was the proposal from the Labor Party, which they pulled out of at the last minute. It was going to be a 1.5% tax from if you have about $5 million, not including the family home. The other proposal was by the Greens. They've had proposals in 2020 election as well. They made proposals of a 2.5% tax on your net wealth from $2 million if you're single and $4 million if you're a couple. Both of these would have made one of the highest wealth taxes in the world, with the exception of a couple of regions in Spain. So not only were they proposing wealth taxes, they were proposing them at very high rates by international standards. Like in Switzerland, the rate ranges from 0.1% to 1%, depending on which canton you're in. In Norway, it's 0.8%. They are proposing taxes both at a very high rate and reaching quite well into the sort of upper middle class, or whatever you'd like to use the term. So they weren't mucking about. The Labor Party were, let's just say, they were very keen on it. They pulled out at the very last minute. They've even mapped out the parliamentary timetable of when the bill would go into Parliament. Then they just lost their nerve. While the Greens are threatening to sit on the crossbenches if they don't get their way on the wealth tax.
So it is a policy that is very much, if you like, abroad or in the mix as we head
very light.
Yeah.
And if Labor gets re-elected, the Greens are threatening to play very tough unless they don't get their way in some way. So it's not a hypothetical.
Jim, can you just tie-ho for a moment? I just want to break in and let people know that the Minister of Justice, we understand, has resigned. She's been charged with reckless driving and resisting arrest. So that is another blow for Chris Hipkins and for Labor. Kiri Allen, the Minister of Justice, we understand, has resigned after an auto accident in Wellington last night. And we understand that she has been charged with reckless driving and resisting arrest. All right, we will get back to you, Jim. Jim, so a wealth tax, we already have a graduated tax system, so we already tax people according to, their wealth by income, right? That's the definition we use now to have a graduated system. It's what you're earning, what comes in each year, will define how much tax you pay, and the more you earn, the more you pay, which in itself, I guess broadly, is a wealth tax. When we move away from that to the amount of assets we have, which seems to me to be the difference with this sort of tax, is that right? That we're judging your wealth by your assets?
Your net wealth, your assets after your liabilities, although the Greens want to tax your trust at just a flat 1.5% without any regard to what your liabilities are. So that is quite a radical proposal by them. The Greens think they'll get lots of money from that because they worked out there's a lot of assets in that, but most assets in trusts are someone's family home. So they were going to tax 1 in 5 family homes, or where you are with the homeowner, it's in a trust. So they wanted to tax that as well. So I just don't think they researched their own proposals that well, because they were claiming their wealth tax wouldn't affect.
Is there any country that has a similar tax on wealth?
Not similar to the proposal by the Greens, both in the terms of the rate in which they impose it and its extent of ignoring liabilities. In the case of the Labor Party, there's a couple of other countries that have proposals. There's Switzerland, there's Norway, and there's Spanish regions except Madrid. But there used to be about a dozen countries that had wealth taxes, say, in 1990, but they've all been getting rid of them because they weren't thought to be raising much revenue. They were a nuisance to comply with. There was a lot of tax avoidance. They thought that the taxing successful people wasn't the way to promote a larger economy and have generally a more successful and prosperous growing economy. So we're sort of going against the trend if we were going to introduce a wealth tax, particularly at such a high rate.
Jim, have you had a look at what impact on our economy a tax like this would have were it introduced?
Well, essentially, when you're taxing wealth, you're taxing investment. And when you're taxing investment, it means if you introduce quite a high wealth tax, you'll have a lot less investment, which means a lot less capital for workers to work with. And if they have less investment in the workplace and less capital to work with, wages will ultimately be lower. So in the end, it'll mean lower wages for ordinary people, because it's not just the wealthy who will pay it, because they'll just be reducing their investment quite a lot. The evidence that people use in the few studies there are, such as Switzerland, found that if you have a wealth tax of 1%, it reduces taxable wealth by between 7% and 22%. Even if some of that's just tax avoidance, you're still talking about a significant reduction in the amount of wealth held at the top end of the scale, which means that's wealth they're not reinvesting in their businesses. Because if you look at the National Business Review's rich list or other studies of who is rich, most rich people run businesses. They're successful business people. And if you attack successful business people with very high personal taxes, you're far less likely to see them reinvesting in their business, and more importantly, not even starting it up at all. Because if you look at the wealth tax of, say, the Greens one, let's say 2.5%, it's a nice number. If you're earning, say, 5% in a business investment, which is not an unreasonable number, or 6%, first of all, you pay 40% or so in taxes on the income, so you're down to about 3 or 4%. Then you've got a wealth tax of either 2.5% or 1.5% coming in to cut you down even further. So it's quite simple. It's a really ruinous tax on any expanding business, particularly small businesses. If you're a small business person worth a couple of $1 million, the moment you start trying to, build your business and be more successful, you start paying a wealth tax of a couple
so
of percentage points.
And it's really blunt. And when you think about it, really obvious, it's a disincentive to become rich.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, it's somewhat quite difficult to do so if you're losing most of your income to either paying your wealth tax or paying your income tax. Like the classic example I worked out was the family farm. The average family farm has a net wealth, if they're a dairy farm, of $3.8 million. And a wealth tax on that, according to the Greens, they want to say something like $45,000 off that $3.8 million. The thing is, the average cash receipts of a farm is about $130,000. So they're taking $45,000 in a wealth tax, and they want some income tax out of that somewhere as well. So you haven't got much left over to run your business, much less build it and employ more people and pay better people.
Yeah.
They're very high rates of tax that have been proposed, and Labor seem quite serious about their 1.5%.
Yeah, though the Prime Minister has ruled it out, right? The Prime Minister says no, it's off the table, and Grant Robertson says I'm a team player, so we can presume for now that it's not on the table, Jim.
Oh, well, there's the post-election talks. There's post-election coalition talks. And the extent whether the Labor Party will be dragged willingly into some sort of compromise about a wealth tax is a cause for legitimate speculation. Mm. Because maybe they won't put it at 2.5%, but maybe they'll put it at something, and once at some small level, it will slowly increase. So it's very hard to rule anything off the table, particularly when the Greens were very inflamed by this being killed off by a captain's call from Chris Hipkins. It's quite clear that the Labor Party, well, they don't want it, or whether they'll be pushed into it somewhat willingly is a legitimate question to ask. The Greens want one?
Legitimate, but as I say, at the moment, we don't have a major party that has it as policy. We did see yesterday a tax policy unveiled by Winston Peters, a financial genius that he is, saying that he's going to index tax rates to inflation so we don't get this bracket creep problem. Your thoughts on that, Jim?
Well, that's a very good idea, because at the moment I think people almost on the minimum wage are heading towards the 30% tax rate. It is at the cut-offs at 48,000, as I recall, and so that's a good idea. I think the Nationals have proposed that as well, and they go back a couple of years, and they're indexing, as I recall. So to inflation, they've got a couple of years to catch up on, I think, rather than just bringing it in now just as inflation may be getting back in control, because a lot of people now are starting to be on quite a high marginal tax rate, even if you're on a low income.
Yeah. But also, Jim, the truth is, isn't it, when you take in, working for families and every other benefit you can get, a huge number of New Zealanders don't pay any income tax.
That's true. Although they don't pay a lot of. If you're on a low income and you're a family, you don't pay much tax. Mm. But still, you face a very high marginal tax rate. Because I think the working for families with withholding rates about 25%. Throw in a marginal tax rate at coming on 30% now, even if you're on the minimum wage, and you don't really have much. So that makes 55%, and there's various other assistance you can get. So because of this failure to index the tax scales, people on low incomes now are facing very high abatement rates if they work anymore or get a pay rise. Yeah,
and the fact is that taxing people richer than them isn't going to do anything for them and their quality of life.
No, not really. It just means the people who own their businesses they have less money to reinvest in the business, or have less reason to start it up in the first place. Because as soon as their start-up succeeds, Labor or the Greens want to slap it down with quite a serious wealth tax.
Yeah. Jim, I thank you for walking me through that this morning. I feel like I'm a little bit smarter than I was when this interview started. I thank you very much. I thank you for your time. Jim Rose from the Taxpayers Union, explaining why, well, it might make you feel good that someone else is as miserable as you if they get taxed a bit more. But really, it wouldn't be great for our economy. And I do stress that at the moment, Labor says no wealth tax. Greens say it's a big deal. I'm sure the Maori Party would be into it.